The morning of May 19, 1944. 300 miles northeast of Bougainville, the Pacific rolled in slow cobalt swells beneath a dome of heat. Aboard the United States ship England, destroyer escort number 635, Lieutenant Commander John Williamson bent over the plotting table in the Combat Information Center. His pencil traced intersecting lines, angles sharpening into geometry, probabilities hardening into predictions. Through the bulkhead, the steady ping of the sonar set cut the water at 15-second intervals. Each echo returned a whisper of what lay below: salt water, thermal layers, schools of fish, and somewhere in that darkness, steel. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The radio intercept had been specific: Japanese submarine Executive, bound for Bougainville, with rice rations for a starving garrison. The Codebreakers at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had peeled back the layers of encrypted Kana until clean coordinates emerged. Commander Hamilton Haynes, directing the hunt from USS George, had vectored 3 destroyer escorts into position: England, George, and Raby, none displacing more than 1,400 tons, none carrying guns larger than 3 inches. Yet forward of England's bridge sat a weapon that would rewrite the mathematics of undersea warfare. A British invention that American doctrine would perfect: 24 Spigot mortars arranged in 6 rows of 4. Empty, the launcher looked like a hedgehog's back, bristles of steel reaching toward the sky. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Imperial Japanese Navy doctrine in the spring of 1944 rested on assumptions forged in an earlier war. Destroyer escorts, small warships optimized for convoy protection, were considered minor threats. Japanese submarine commanders trained to evade depth charges, the standard anti-submarine weapon, canisters of high explosive, rolled from a ship's stern and detonated at preset depths. The tactics were well rehearsed. Listen for the attacking ship's propellers, count the intervals between pings, predict the drop pattern, then execute a violent maneuver. Turn hard, change depth, create separation. Depth charges exploded blindly, relying on hydrostatic shock to crush pressure hulls. A submarine 300 feet down, 200 feet to the side, might feel the concussion, hear the roar, but survive intact. By mid-1944, Japanese submarine captains had accumulated years of evasion experience. The Imperial Navy's anti-submarine warfare school would not open until March of 1944, a delay that reflected strategic priorities. Japan's naval doctrine centered on the decisive fleet engagement, the climactic surface battle where battleships and cruisers would annihilate the American Pacific Fleet. Submarines existed to scout for that battle, to reduce enemy strength through attrition before the main event. Convoy protection, merchant defense, the unglamorous work of commerce warfare received minimal attention. The investment went into super battleships, fleet carriers, heavy cruisers, destroyer escorts, corvettes, frigates. The small combatants that might shield merchant shipping remained in desperately short supply. This doctrinal blindness created opportunity. The NA line, a lattice of 7 submarines stretched from Truk to the Admiralty Islands, represented Admiral Soemu Toyoda's early warning system. Operation A-Go, the planned counterstroke against the next American offensive, depended on submarine scouts spotting carrier task forces before they struck. Each boat held a specific position: I-16, Ru-104, Ru-105, Ru-106, Ru-108, Ru-116, and Ru-117, stationed at designated intervals like beads on a string. The pattern was logical, geometrically sound, and fatally predictable once the Codebreakers at Pearl Harbor intercepted the position assignments. What Japanese commanders did not anticipate was a weapon that violated the fundamental assumptions of anti-submarine combat. Traditional depth charge attacks required a ship to pass directly over the submarine, losing sonar contact in the final moments as the target entered what operators called the blind spot. Sound traveled fast in water, roughly 4,800 feet per second, but at close range the time between transmitted ping and returning echo compressed into an instantaneous merge. The human ear could not distinguish outgoing pulse from incoming reply. The submarine disappeared from the sonar picture precisely when accurate position data mattered most. The attacking ship, blind, dropped charges based on dead reckoning, hoping the submarine had not changed course or depth in those crucial seconds. The Hedgehog eliminated that weakness. Developed by the British Royal Navy's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a group nicknamed the Wheezers and Dodgers for their unconventional approaches. The weapon represented a radical departure. Instead of rolling charges off the stern, the Hedgehog fired projectiles forward, up and over the bow, into the water, ahead of the ship, while sonar contact remained unbroken. Each projectile, 7.2 inches in diameter, weighed 65 pounds, and carried 35 pounds of torpex, an explosive compound more powerful than TNT. The bombs fell in an elliptical pattern, roughly 140 feet by 120 feet at a range of 200 yards. The critical innovation lay in the fuse. Depth charges used time or depth settings, detonating whether they hit the target or not. The resulting explosion churned the water, created turbulence, masked sonar returns for up to 15 minutes. Every miss announced itself with thunder that gave the submarine captain valuable information. The direction of the attack, the attacker's assumptions about depth, the pattern of the drop. A skilled commander used that data to plot his next evasion. The Hedgehog's contact fuse changed the equation. The bombs detonated only when they struck steel. A miss was silent. The water remained calm. Sonar contact held. The attacking ship adjusted aim and fired again within seconds, informed by continuous tracking data. The submarine captain received no feedback, no warning, no opportunity to calculate angles from explosion positions. British experience in the Atlantic proved the concept. From 1942 through mid-1944, 5,174 depth charge attacks yielded 85.5 kills, a success rate of 1 in 60. The Hedgehog, in 268 attacks, scored 47 kills, 1 in 5.7. The mathematics were undeniable, yet numbers alone did not explain the weapon's lethality. Psychology mattered as much as physics. Depth charge barrages, however inaccurate, created psychological pressure through sheer noise and concussion. Submariners endured hours of rolling thunder, plates groaning, lights flickering, men wondering if the next blast would be the one to breach the hull. The Hedgehog offered a different horror. Silence, then sudden catastrophic contact. No warning, no gradual accumulation of damage, just the abrupt transition from hunting to dying. The weapon arrived in American service as reverse lend-lease, British technology flowing west instead of American equipment flowing east. Captain Paul Hammond, working with British engineers, adapted the design for installation on United States Navy destroyer escorts. By late 1942, the Mark Twain and Mark Elf variants entered service. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts, purpose-built anti-submarine platforms, carried Hedgehogs as standard equipment. England, commissioned in December of 1943 at Bethlehem Shipbuilding in San Francisco, mounted her launcher forward of the bridge, where a 5-inch gun turret would have sat on a larger warship. The trade-off reflected mission priorities: less firepower against surface targets, overwhelming advantage against submarines. Lieutenant Commander Walter Pendleton commanded England. A regular Navy officer with pre-war service, Pendleton understood the destroyer escort's role. Screen convoys, hunt submarines, protect the logistics chain that fed the island-hopping campaign, but the ship's tactical brain resided in the Combat Information Center, where Executive Officer John Williamson translated sonar data into attack solutions. Williamson brought an unusual combination of credentials. Cambridge-educated, he possessed the mathematical sophistication to work three-dimensional geometry under pressure. He had served 9 months on neutrality patrol in the Atlantic during 1941, before America's entry into the war. Witnessing firsthand the toll German U-boats extracted from merchant convoys, that experience, watching ships burn and men drown, had crystallized his understanding. Anti-submarine warfare was not art, It was science. Sound propagation equations, target motion analysis, probability calculations. Get the geometry right, and the Hedgehog would find steel. Williamson had then served as an instructor at the Subchaser Training School in Miami, drilling the next generation of sonar operators. He understood the equipment's limitations and capabilities, how water temperature affected sonar range, how thermal layers created false echoes, how a skilled operator distinguished whale song from machinery noise. After commanding a patrol craft on East Coast convoy duty, he received orders to England as executive officer. The posting reunited technical knowledge with operational necessity. By May of 1944, England's Combat Information Centre functioned as a precision instrument. Sonar operators, rotated in 15-minute shifts, maintaining peak concentration. Williamson worked the plotting table, calculating target depth bands, speed, course changes. Pendleton on the bridge executed the manoeuvres, trusting his executive officer's solutions. The ship's crew numbered 186. Many had never seen combat. Destroyer escorts, rushed into service to plug desperate gaps in convoy protection, received crews scraped together from training commands and replenishment pools. Yet England's record from March through mid-May of 1944 showed competence. Escort duty between Espiritu Santo and Guadalcanal, occasional runs to Noumea, once to the Marshalls, routine work, convoy shepherding, showing the flag. No submarine contacts, no Hedgehog launches. The weapon sat loaded but unfired, a theoretical capability waiting for the test that would validate or discredit years of British development and American adaptation. On May 18, 1944, that test arrived. The decoded intercept specified Isaacsen's route and timing. Commander Hines, directing Escort Division 39 from George, ordered the 3 destroyer escorts to intercept. They departed Purvis Bay on Florida Island, steaming northwest into open ocean. The search geometry assumed Isaacsen would approach Bougainville on the surface to maximize speed, then dive when radar or visual detection seemed imminent. American radar could pick up a surfaced submarine at ranges exceeding 10 miles in good conditions. The Japanese boat's commander, Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka, knew this. His options narrowed to a grim calculus. Surface running conserved battery power, but invited air attack and radar detection. Submerged running offered concealment but drained batteries, and batteries meant limited endurance before the boat had to surface for air and diesel recharge. That necessity, the requirement to surface, formed the noose around every submarine war. German U-boats in the Atlantic faced the same constraint. Japanese boats in the Pacific dealt with it through elaborate patrol schedules, surfacing at night when American air patrols were minimal. But May of 1944 saw American radar technology reaching new sophistication. Surface search sets could detect low-profile targets at night, in weather, through conditions that would have hidden submarines 2 years earlier. The hunter-killer doctrine combined airborne radar, surface ship sonar, and radio intelligence into an integrated net. Isaacsen, running her rice supply mission, entered that net shortly past midday on May 19th. The sonar contact came as a hard echo, bearing fine to starboard, range approximately 2,000 yards. Sonar operator David Chun, working his set in the standard 15-minute rotation, distinguished the return from ambient noise. The quality of the echo, sharp and metallic, suggested steel rather than a biological or geological feature. He reported to the bridge. Williamson entered the Combat Information Centre and began his calculations. The target appeared to be moving southwest at moderate speed, depth estimated between 100 and 200 feet. The thermal layer structure that day, measured by temperature depth recordings, suggested a weak boundary around 150 feet. A submarine captain might try to hide beneath it, using the temperature differential to refract sonar beams away from the boat. Pendleton manoeuvred England into attack position, approaching bow on, to minimize propeller noise that might alert the Japanese. The Hedgehog's effective range governed the geometry, fire too far out, and the projectiles would splash harmlessly around the target. Close too near, and the submarine might turn inside the attack pattern. Williamson settled on 200 yards, the maximum range for the Mark 10 launcher. The first salvo walked into the water and drifted through silence. No detonations. Clean miss. The geometry had been slightly off, or the submarine had maneuvered during the projectile's fall time, or both. Williamson adjusted, recalculating depth based on the sonar picture. The second pattern set deeper. A single thud resonated through the deck plates, felt as much as heard. Not the catastrophic roar of a kill, but evidence of contact. One bomb, perhaps two, had grazed the submarine's hull without achieving the solid impact needed to trigger the full explosive train. In Executive's control room, emergency klaxons sounded, damage reports filtered forward. Minor flooding, containable but concerning. The boat's executive officer consulted quickly with Yoshitaka. They were dealing with something new. Traditional depth charge attacks came in patterns, rolling thunder that allowed the captain to time his evasions. This was different. Quiet, then impact, then quiet again. The American ship remained in sonar contact, as evidenced by the continued pinging. Another attack would follow. Yoshitaka ordered a hard turn and increased depth to 300 feet, hoping to slide beneath the thermal layer and break contact. The maneuver worked, temporarily. Williamson's third attack fell behind as the submarine cut across the search grid. Sonar, contact degraded in the thermal layer, the returning echoes weakening as the temperature boundary bent sound waves. But the Combat Information Center team had drilled for this scenario. Operators adjusted frequency, increased ping power, waited for the submarine to clear the layer's far edge. 5 minutes later, contact re-established. Williamson plotted the new bearing. The submarine had turned northeast, away from Bougainville, abandoning the supply mission in favor of survival. The fourth Hedgehog attack missed as well, the submarine jerking into a sudden turn that carried it outside the fall pattern. Yoshitaka and his crew were fighting for every second, counting pings, reading the rhythm of the attack, cutting against the grain. But the English had one advantage the Japanese captain could not overcome: continuous contact. Every miss provided data. Every maneuver revealed speed and turning radius. Williamson built a picture of the submarine's performance envelope, how quickly it could change depth, how tightly it could turn, how much speed it could sustain without creating cavitation noise that would pinpoint its location. After 4 attacks, patterns emerged. The submarine preferred depth changes to lateral maneuvers. It turned right more often than left, suggesting possible damage to portside ballast controls. It maintained speeds below 6 knots when not actively evading, conserving battery power. Williamson committed to a 5th attack, narrowing his solution. Bearing steadying, range closing, depth estimated at 250 feet. He directed Pendleton to approach at minimal sonar search speed, just enough steerage way to hold position. The Hedgehog launcher elevated, training slightly right of centerline. The fire control solution went to the weapon. Williamson gave the order. The mortar cuffed, 24 steel projectiles arcing into the Pacific sky. They struck the water, sank through the column at terminal velocity, and several found metal. The blast lifted England's stern, shock waves propagating through hull and ocean alike. Sailors on deck fell to their knees. In the engine room, men grabbed stanchions as the ship rang like a struck bell. Through the sonar headphones, the sound was unmistakable, the sharp crack of impact followed by the deeper rumble of internal spaces flooding, the groan of frames yielding to pressure. Then, 300 feet below the surface, silence. Within minutes, debris stippled the ocean. Oil, the dark rainbow sheen that marked a ruptured fuel tank. Timber fragments, pieces of interior fittings blown free by the blast. A canvas hat, a wooden bench, the flotsam of 90 men and their boat rising from the depths. Commander Haynes, observing from George, confirmed the kill. 1. The submarine destroyed. But the Codebreakers had already extracted more intelligence from Japanese radio traffic. The NA line existed, 7 submarines stretched across predicted American approach routes. Executive had been the first. 6 remained. The mathematics of the hunt had shifted from theory to practice. The Hedgehog worked. The question now was whether England's crew could sustain the performance. 2 days later, before dawn on May 22nd, George's radar detected a surface contact. Range 12,000 yards, bearing north by northwest. The contact was small, low profile, moving at roughly 14 knots. A submarine running on the surface, charging batteries before dawn, forced it back below. George's searchlight carved the night, a brilliant column of white light lancing across black water. For an instant, the submarine's conning tower stood illuminated. Then the dive klaxon sounded aboard Roa-106, and the boat bit into the ocean, vents roaring, ballast tanks flooding, the hull angle steepening as the submarine clawed for depth. But the damage was done. George held the position, the submarine's last known bearing and speed. The destroyer escort attacked with Hedgehogs, 2 patterns that missed as Roa-106's captain rang every evasion from his training. Hard turns, depth changes, strict silent running. The submarine twisted through the search geometry, exploiting the brief degradation in sonar contact that came with each American maneuver. Yet George maintained pursuit, passing targeting data to England as she closed. Williamson took the handoff and began his analysis. The submarine was moving northwest, depth estimated at 180 feet. The captain had shown skill, jinking at irregular intervals to throw off attack solutions. But the battery was burning down. Every turn, every depth change, consumed power. The submarine could not dance forever. Williamson's first attempt missed. The submarine reversed course bow on to England, a bold maneuver that might have been an attempt to torpedo the attacking ship. If so, the Japanese captain did not understand the Hedgehog system. American doctrine kept torpedo tubes trained on the target, but the primary weapon fired forward without requiring the ship to turn broadside. The submarine's reversal actually simplified the geometry, bow-on presentation reducing lateral motion to near zero. Williamson adjusted and fired again. The second pattern scored at least 3 hits. The underwater explosion was huge, a visible plume of disturbed water surging to the surface. Roa-106's pressure hull had unsipped catastrophically. 50 men died in seconds. The ocean closed, swallowing the wreckage, leaving oil and debris to mark where a submarine had been. 2 boats in 4 days. The pattern Japanese commanders feared was emerging. Some new American device, some weapon that exploded only on contact, was systematically destroying the NA line. Radio traffic from 6th Fleet headquarters on Saipan urged radio silence, minimal surfacing, strict adherence to assigned positions, but those orders created their own trap. A submarine that stayed on station, that avoided defensive maneuvers to preserve radio silence, was a stationary target waiting for the geometry to close. And England's crew was learning. Each attack refined the doctrine. Sonar operators recognized submarine evasion patterns faster. Williamson's solutions grew more precise. The crew's confidence built with each kill. The 3rd submarine fell on May 23rd. Roa-104, caught north of New Ireland, fought a 2-hour running battle. Raby's radar found her on the surface. She dove and executed the full repertoire of defensive tactics. Jamming bursts to clutter American sonar, compressed air releases to mimic a damaged boat blowing tanks, sharp turns, and stepladder depth changes. The George attacked multiple times without success. Raby tried and also missed. The submarine's captain, Lieutenant Hisashi Itsubuchi, demonstrated exceptional skill, slipping through layers, conserving battery power between evasions, maintaining position in a narrow thermal boundary that weakened sonar returns. After 2 hours, Williamson took control. He reasoned that a submarine burning power so aggressively could not sustain the effort. The next attack should target not where the submarine was, but where it would have to be to conserve energy. Williamson calculated the most efficient course and depth for a boat trying to escape while preserving battery reserves. He positioned England to cover that geometry. The Hedgehog spread blanketed the predicted path. Several bombs kissed steel. The secondary explosion that followed, batteries rupturing, compartments flooding, confirmed the kill. Oil dotted the surface. timbers floated up. Below, another coffin settled into the deep Pacific mud. 3 boats in 5 days. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding Pacific Fleet, wanted lessons learned. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, wanted more escorts carrying more Hedgehog mortars. The weapon's effectiveness had exceeded projections. The statistics were undeniable, but the ramifications reached beyond immediate tactical success. The NA line's destruction had gouged a hole in Japanese operational planning. Operation A-Go depended on submarine scouts detecting American carrier movements before the main fleet engagement. Take away those scouts, and Admiral Toyoda flew blind. He would have to rely on air patrols, stretching resources already inadequate. The decisive battle Japan needed, the climactic engagement that might restore balance to the Pacific War, was slipping beyond reach because 3 small destroyer escorts with a British mortar were systematically erasing the early warning net. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Ro 116 came next, early on May 24th. George caught her running fast near the eastern end of the NA line. The submarine dove immediately, executing a crash dive that brought her below 100 feet in under a minute, but Williamson had accumulated 4 successful kills. He understood the performance envelope of Japanese submarines, how quickly they could turn, how much speed they could afford before cavitation bubbles formed around the propellers, advertising position to sonar. He fed those parameters into his solution. The first Hedgehog burst Tora Ro 116 open. No grand secondary explosion followed, just the harsh chorus sonar operators learned to recognize. The slow tearing of steel frames under pressure, the choked rush of water into compartments, the groaning collapse of a structure designed for 15 atmospheres of pressure at depth, but failing under 20-25 atmospheres as flooding pulled the wreckage deeper. For long minutes, the air in England's Combat Information Centre went tight as operators heard the boat dying below them. Then, silence. Final and complete. 4 boats in 6 days. Senior commanders at Pearl Harbor and in Washington took notice. But England's division was running low on fuel and ammunition. Each Hedgehog salvo consumed 24 projectiles. The ship carried reloads, but the magazine was depleting. Fuel oil levels had dropped below 50%. Standard doctrine called for withdrawal to Manus for replenishment. A hunter-killer group built around escort carrier Hoggart Bay arrived to take over the search. 4 destroyers and the carrier, with Wildcat fighters and Avenger torpedo bombers to expand the search radius. Commander Haynes requested one last sweep, while his 3 destroyer escorts headed for Manus. Radio intelligence hinted that Rowan Hundertacht lurked nearby, on station near the western edge of what remained of the NA line. Late on the night of May 26th, England found her. The sonar trace was crisp and shallow, depth estimated at 90 feet. The submarine was moving at good speed, roughly 8 knots, too fast for a crew committed to long submerged endurance. The captain was gambling on speed over stealth, trying to reposition before American hunters bracketed his location. Williamson made the call within minutes. The target's speed simplified the geometry. Fast movement meant strong propeller noise, clear sonar returns, minimal ambiguity in bearing and range. The Hedgehog pattern hit true. A bright, eerie wash of light glowed below the surface, the unmistakable signature of ruptured battery spaces releasing electrical energy into salt water. The wreck sank trailing chemical flame, a brief funeral pyre visible from above before the ocean's weight crushed the last airspaces. 5 boats in 8 days, 1 submarine remained from the NA line, Ro 105, under Lieutenant Junichi Inu, with a senior division captain embarked as observer. The boat had a history, near misses and narrow escapes during previous patrols. Rescue work that demonstrated seamanship and nerve. Intelligence files noted that Ro 105 had dodged torpedoes the previous year, evaded multiple depth charge attacks, and attempted a torpedo shot against an American cruiser that missed when the fish malfunctioned. The crew's seasoning made them dangerous. They would not panic. they would execute every defensive measure with precision. Japanese 6th Fleet watchstanders on Saipan had begun reading enough American radio traffic to sense the hunters' positions. The pattern was clear. The NA line was collapsing from east to west. I-16 dead. Row 106 dead. Row 104 dead. Row 116 dead. Row 108 dead. Only Row 105 and Row 117 remained, and the Americans were closing. Orders went out pressing the surviving boats toward withdrawal, but fuel and air imposed limits. To leave at once, Row 105 would have to run on the surface through air-watched water. The risk was catastrophic. American radar and patrol aircraft made daylight surface transit suicidal. Yet staying on station meant facing the weapon that had destroyed 5 submarines in 8 days. George saw Row 105 first on the night of May 29th. Radar contact at 12,000 yards. The submarine dove. What followed was an endurance test that would validate both sides' training and resolve. Through the dark hours into dawn and beyond, George made run after run. Raby joined, and together they expended nearly every Hedgehog projectile between them against a target that refused to present a straightforward solution. The Japanese crew executed the full catalogue of evasive arts: sudden turns on short intervals, depth changes in tight bands, never more than 50 feet per shift to avoid depth gauge overshoot. Strict silent running, machinery secured except for essential systems, precise speed management to hold propeller noise below the bubble threshold. Bursts of compressed air at calculated moments to paint false pictures on American sonar, making the boat appear damaged or losing depth control. Emergency trim changes knifed the boat's nose up or lifted the stern just enough to throw off American aim. The submarine's crew fought from experience. They knew that destroyer escorts carried limited ammunition, make them expend their loads, and they would have to withdraw. Battery power was the constraint. A submarine at depth could sustain perhaps 16 hours of silent running before the battery reached minimum charge levels. After that, surfacing became mandatory, but if they could hold out until nightfall, they might surface under darkness and escape. For most of May 30th, England held back. Doctrine suggested reserving the most successful ship for the final attack if other units failed. Haynes wanted George and Raby to score kills, to demonstrate that the Hedgehog's effectiveness extended beyond England's crew. But after a full day of frustration, after George and Raby had fired dozens of patterns without confirmed hits, Haynes cut England loose. Williamson had been shadowing the geometry from the edge, tracking George's and Raby's attacks, mapping how the enemy captain conserved power when the engagement lengthened. He had watched the submarine's depth band shift as crew fatigue crept in, small errors accumulating, the boat's movements becoming marginally more predictable. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. By the time England entered the attack, Williamson had built a complete picture. The submarine was at approximately 200 feet, trending southwest toward deeper water. The captain preferred depth changes to lateral maneuvers, probably because the boat's hydraulic steering had sustained damage. The crew had stopped releasing air decoys, either because they had exhausted the compressed air reserve or because they recognized the tactic was no longer working. Battery power had to be critical. The submarine had been submerged for more than 20 hours. Life support systems, carbon dioxide scrubbers, trim pumps, all drew power. The crew would be breathing air thick with exhaust, fighting headaches and nausea, struggling to maintain focus. Williamson calculated one final solution. He positioned England bow on to the submarine's estimated track. The Hedgehog spoke, 24 projectiles following the ballistic arc toward impact. Several bombs hit. A vast breath of compressed air blew from the submarine. The emergency surface blow triggered automatically as compartments flooded and the depth gauge read increasing pressure. But the damage was catastrophic. The pressure hull had breached in multiple locations. The air could not lift the sinking weight. The boat fell, trailing bubbles, until the final implosion came at depth. Oil and debris rose into daylight. The senior captain, one of the Imperial Navy's more experienced submarine leaders, went down with the crew. 68 men, 6 submarines in 12 days. Part 2, continuation, word raced through the command structure. Admiral King's message arrived within days. The Navy would always carry a ship named England. The promise would be fulfilled in 1963 when a guided missile cruiser bore the name, serving until 1994. But beyond honor and recognition, the immediate impact rewrote doctrine across the Pacific Fleet. The 7th Squadron's destruction had created a void in Japanese intelligence gathering that could not be quickly filled. Admiral Toyoda, preparing Operation A-Go for what he hoped would be the decisive naval engagement, had counted on submarine eyes to track American carrier movements. Those eyes were gone. The strategic ramifications cascaded forward. Without submarine scouts, Japanese reconnaissance had to rely on land-based patrol aircraft and occasional cruiser sorties. Both consumed fuel oil that Japan could not afford to waste. The logistics of the Pacific War had tilted decisively toward America by mid-1944. Service Squadron 10 at Ulithi Atoll demonstrated the American capacity to create forward bases from nothing. The massive anchorage at Ulithi could repair, refit, and resupply entire carrier task forces thousands of miles from Pearl Harbor. Ships deployed to the Western Pacific and operated for a year or more without returning home. Japan possessed no equivalent capability. Each day's operations drained irreplaceable fuel reserves. Each aircraft lost could not be replaced by training pipelines, already gutted by attrition and fuel shortages. The destruction of the NA line forced Toyoda into reactive posture. Unable to track American movements through submarine reports, he positioned his fleet based on guesswork and incomplete intelligence. He assumed the American build-up at Manus indicated a strike toward the Palau Islands. The logic seemed sound. General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Command had established beachheads across New Guinea. Palau represented the next logical objective in his drive toward the Philippines. Toyoda committed his fleet accordingly, steaming toward Palau to intercept the expected invasion force. 2 weeks later, on June 15, 1944, American amphibious forces stormed ashore on Saipan in the Marianas. Toyoda's fleet was out of position, hundreds of miles southwest of where it needed to be. The subsequent Battle of the Philippine Sea, called the Marianas Turkey Shoot by American aviators, destroyed Japanese carrier aviation as an effective force. 3 carriers sank, over 600 aircraft lost. Trained pilots, irreplaceable veterans who had survived 2 years of combat, died in burning cockpits or drowned in their parachutes. The decisive battle Japan needed became the decisive defeat that sealed the war's outcome. England's role in that catastrophe was indirect but undeniable. By destroying the NA line, the destroyer escort had blinded Japanese fleet intelligence at the critical moment. Submarines that should have reported American carrier movements instead rested on the ocean floor. The Hedgehog had proven itself not merely as a tactical weapon, but as a strategic instrument. Its effectiveness rippled through operational planning, forcing Japanese commanders into decisions based on assumptions rather than confirmed intelligence. The technology itself represented a fusion of British innovation and American industrial capacity. The Hedgehog's conceptual lineage traced back to Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker's Spigot mortar design from the interwar years. The Spigot principle, where the propellant charge worked against a rod fitted inside the projectile's tail, allowed a single launcher to fire varying warhead sizes. The same basic mechanism powered the Blacker bombard infantry mortar and the PIAT anti-tank weapon. Commander Charles Goodeve of the Royal Navy's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development adapted the concept for naval use, creating a forward-throwing anti-submarine mortar that entered British service in 1942. Initial results in the Atlantic were mixed. The first installations yielded no kills for months. Success rates hovered around 5%, only marginally better than depth charges. The weapons suffered from reliability problems. Swells and spray covered the launcher during heavy North Atlantic weather. Subsequent firing attempts revealed circuit problems that launched incomplete patterns. The psychological effect proved problematic as well. Depth charge explosions, however ineffective, provided crews with sensory feedback. The thunder and concussion suggested they were fighting back, damaging the enemy. Hedgehog's silent misses discouraged crews who assumed their attacks had failed completely. The Royal Navy issued directives ordering captains to report why they had not used Hedgehog on underwater contacts. The resistance stemmed partly from inexperience and partly from legitimate concerns about the weapon's early performance. But by mid-1943, improvements in training and equipment integration began yielding results. The critical factor was the Combat Information Center concept, which appeared in American and British warships around the same time. The CIC centralized information flow, allowing continuous tracking of submarine contacts while the ship's captain focused on maneuvering. This division of labor, with the executive officer working the tactical problem in the CIC while the captain commanded from the bridge, multiplied effectiveness. By 1944, advanced sonar and radar systems fed targeting data directly to weapons. Leading-edge technology integrated into a coherent system rather than operating as isolated tools. The dramatic improvement in Hedgehog accuracy from mid-1944 onward reflected this integration. England's Combat Information Center represented the mature version of the concept. Williamson in the CIC, calculating firing solutions. Pendleton on the bridge, executing maneuvers. Sonar operators rotating through shifts, maintaining peak alertness. Fire control technicians managing the weapon. Engine room crew delivering precise speed control for optimal sonar performance. The Submarine-Killers resulted from teamwork as much as technology. The Japanese response evolved slowly, constrained by resource limitations and doctrinal rigidity. Submarine commanders received warnings about American forward-throwing weapons, but specifics remained vague. Captured documents from later in the war revealed that some Japanese submariners believed the Americans possessed sonar systems that could track through evasive maneuvers, explaining why depth changes and radical turns no longer guaranteed escape. The truth, that continuous sonar contact, combined with contact-fused weapons, had eliminated the attack blind spot, was simpler but no less deadly. Japanese submarine construction could not replace losses. The Imperial Navy had begun the war with a respectable undersea arm, roughly 63 boats operational in December 1941. By mid-1944, attrition had reduced available submarines to critical levels. Replacement rates averaged 3 to 4 boats per month, inadequate against losses that exceeded that number. American hunter-killer teams could be in many places simultaneously. Japanese shipyards, bombed repeatedly and starved for resources, could not add hulls fast enough. The mathematics were unforgiving. American production, by contrast, had reached industrial scale. Destroyer escorts rolled from shipyards at a rate of dozens per month. By war's end, the United States would commission over 500 destroyer escorts, the vast majority equipped with Hedgehogs or the later Mousetrap launchers for smaller vessels. The Mousetrap used rocket propulsion instead of spigot mortars, allowing installation on ships too small to accommodate the Hedgehog's recoil forces. Both weapons share the critical advantage of contact detonation and forward firing. The Hedgehog's influence extended beyond immediate tactical results. 11 of the last 16 U-boat sinkings by United States Navy forces involved Hedgehog attacks. In the Pacific, destroyer escorts equipped with the weapon sank dozens of Japanese submarines. USS Bangui destroyed RO 111 Sol June 1944. USS Burden R. Hastings sunk RO Rundvierzig the same month. USS William C. Miller got I-6 Sol July. USS Wyman killed RO 48. USS Wyman and USS Reynolds teamed up to sink I-55. The list grew as the year progressed, each kill validating the weapon's design and the doctrine surrounding its use. But England's 12-day patrol remained unmatched. No other ship, American or British, achieved 6 submarine kills in such a compressed time frame. The feat earned England a Presidential Unit Citation, one of the Navy's highest honours for collective achievement. The citation praised the crew's skill, determination, and tactical proficiency, yet the real lesson extended beyond individual excellence. England had demonstrated that mastery of a domain was not magic, it was method married to will. The fusion of signal intelligence cueing search, radar refining detection, sonar maintaining contact, mathematics closing the geometry, and the Hedgehog delivering lethal effect. The pattern became doctrine: find, fix, finish, confirm. 4 steps that transformed submarine hunting from intuition to science. Signal intelligence from Codebreakers at Pearl Harbor provided cueing, narrowing vast ocean areas to manageable search boxes. Radar swept those boxes, detecting surfaced submarines at ranges that gave hunters time to position for attack. Sonar tracked submerged contacts, feeding continuous bearing and range data to the Combat Information Center. Mathematics and discipline closed the attack, calculating where the submarine would be when the Hedgehog bombs arrived. Debris on the surface confirmed the kill, validating the method and providing lessons for the next engagement. England's crew moved from art to science, from hunch to proof. The transformation rippled through the anti-submarine warfare community. Training schools rewrote curricula around continuous contact doctrine. Sonar operators learned to maintain tracking through evasive maneuvers. Fire control teams practiced rapid salvo calculations. Executive officers studied geometry and probability, learning to predict submarine behavior from incomplete data. The Hedgehog became the weapon of decision, the tool that closed the attack when all other factors aligned. The psychological impact on Japanese submariners reached depths that operational analysis could not fully capture. Survivors from damaged submarines reported a pervasive sense of helplessness when facing Hedgehog attacks. Traditional depth charge barrages, however terrifying, followed patterns. The submarine could count explosions, estimate attack direction, calculate evasion angles. The Hedgehog offered no such feedback. Silence, then sudden impact, then flooding and darkness. The weapon created a fear that transcended physical danger. It suggested the Americans possessed capabilities that Japanese training had not prepared them to counter. This psychological effect compounded operational difficulties. Submarine captains grew reluctant to close on targets, knowing that American destroyer escorts might be nearby with their silent killers. Patrol stations were abandoned early when sonar contacts suggested hunters were approaching. Aggressive tactics gave way to caution, then caution bled into paralysis. By late 1944, Japanese submarine effectiveness had declined precipitously. The boats that remained operational spent more time evading than attacking. The attrition war had shifted decisively. The human ledger demands acknowledgement. Somewhere near Bougainville, and across the sweep between Truk and the Admiralty Islands, 6 wrecks settled on the seafloor. Each held a full crew's worth of stories. Raw recruits drafted from fishing villages who learned submarine operations under pressure. Engineers who could disassemble and repair diesel engines in cramped machinery spaces. Sonar operators who distinguished propeller sounds by ear. Captains who predicted enemy tactics through experience and intuition. They fought with courage, executed their orders, and died when the geometry closed and steel met steel. E-16 took 90 men down. Roein 106 claimed 49. Roein 104, another 50 or so. Roein 116 took 56. Roein 108, 58 men. Roein 105, the hardest fight, consumed 68 lives, including a senior captain whose experience might have saved other boats had he survived to share lessons learned. Add the totals, and England's 12-day patrol killed over 400 Japanese submariners. Young men, mostly, teenagers and 20-somethings, who joined the Imperial Navy believing in victory and died in crushing darkness when their hulls failed. On the American side, not one sailor aboard England, George, or Raby died during the hunt. That disparity speaks to preparation, to an industrial base that could deliver thousands of sonar sets and hundreds of thousands of Hedgehog bombs, to schools that built coherent doctrine and drilled men until decisions under pressure became reflex, to codebreakers who read enemy mail and positioned hunters where submarines had to go, to radar that saw through darkness and weather, to a logistics system that kept ships fueled and armed thousands of miles from home. England did not repeat that precise feat again. The NA line was unique, 7 submarines positioned predictably along a traceable route, their movements reported through radio traffic that American codebreakers could read. Later submarine contacts involved isolated boats, brief encounters where the target escaped or weather intervened, or the geometry never quite closed. England fought through the rest of 1944, escorting convoys, supporting amphibious operations, screening carrier task forces. Routine work punctuated by occasional action. On September 9, 1944, England finally met her own crisis. A Japanese air attack near the Palau Islands put a bomb into the ship. The explosion killed 37 crew and wounded 22. Damage control teams fought fires and flooding, saving the ship but ending her combat effectiveness. England limped to Manus for emergency repairs, then steamed to Pearl Harbor and eventually to the West Coast for major reconstruction. She would return to service, but the war was winding down. By the time England rejoined the fleet in early 1945, the Japanese submarine threat had diminished to near insignificance. The ship's name became shorthand for a way of fighting. Naval officers studying anti-submarine warfare at post-war schools analysed England's patrol in detail. The 5 key engagements broke into phases, each offering lessons. First, initiate contact by any means, but pass control to the ship best placed and most practiced with the weapon of decision. George and Raby found submarines, but England closed the kills because Williamson's solutions proved most accurate. Second, maintain contact continuity. When one ship's sonar picture degraded, another stepped in without gaps. Third, treat each miss as data. A salvo that exploded into emptiness still revealed how the target maneuvered. Fourth, pressure the submarine's battery and air. Time was a weapon. Force the enemy to burn power, and he would eventually make mistakes. Fifth, commit the killer blow only when geometry was right. A single tight pattern placed on an enemy who had exhausted his margin could end the fight quickly. Those lessons spread beyond the Pacific. They informed Atlantic convoy escorts hunting the last U-boats. They shaped post-war anti-submarine forces across multiple navies. Ahead-throwing weapons proliferated, evolving from Hedgehog to Squid to Limbo to modern rocket-launched torpedoes. Training rewrote itself around continuous contact doctrine. Sensors matured from simple sonar pings into sophisticated passive and active systems that could read noise signatures, classify contacts, track multiple targets simultaneously. But the skeleton of England's method remained visible. Intelligence cues search. Sensors refine detection. Mathematics closes geometry. Weapons deliver effect. On a personal plane, the story returns to ordinary men at steel consoles. A sonar operator steadies his breathing, so a faint bearing drift does not vanish under the drum of his own pulse. A plotting officer flicks his eyes between stopwatch and grease pencil marks and sees a pattern others miss. A captain holds course for a handful of heartbeats longer than comfort allows, so the last correction lands the ship exactly where mathematics says it must be. In the submarine below, sailors fight flooding with pumps and damage control equipment. They count intervals between pings, trying to predict the next attack. They hope a well-timed turn will make the difference between living and dying. Each side balances fear against training. Each crew executes doctrine under pressure that turns minutes into hours. The boats that died did so with courage, their crews fighting to the end. The ship that killed them did so with discipline, her crew executing a method refined through practice and validated through success. Between the two ran a thread of codebreakers turning syllables into positions, analysts feeding bearings to ships, factory workers riveting hulls and soldering circuits, instructors drilling watchstanders who would never see the faces of the men they would kill. England's 12 days crystallized all of it. Industry, science, and human steadiness fused into a pattern the enemy could neither fully understand in time nor break under pressure. Long after the war, veterans would stand on museum decks and explain to grandchildren why that odd forward-facing array mattered. They would describe a weapon that refused to waste its thunder unless it had found steel, and they would talk quietly about the first time a contact went from blip to boil on the surface, how the ship trembled, how men cheered or fell silent depending on temperament, how they understood in that moment they had crossed a line between preparation and execution. They might not reach for numbers, but the numbers would sit beneath their voices, silent pillars holding up the tale. 12 days, 6 boats, over 400 lives. A turning of the undersea war that reshaped the wider fight above. The wrecks remain deep and cold, the sea keeps its counsel, but the operational truths stand in the logbooks and in what came after. A navy that changed its tools and thinking. An enemy forced to retreat from waters it once prowled, and a legend that still teaches, 79 years later, that mastery of a domain is not magic. It is method married to will. The Hedgehog entered service as a British innovation born from desperation. The Royal Navy, facing catastrophic merchant shipping losses in the Atlantic, needed weapons that worked better than depth charges. The Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, staffed by engineers and scientists too old or too specialized for frontline service, brought unconventional thinking to the problem. They rejected the assumption that anti-submarine weapons had to detonate at preset depths. They questioned why ships had to lose sonar contact during the final attack. They borrowed Blacker's spigot mortar concept from infantry weapons and scaled it for naval use. The result was crude by modern standards. 24 fixed spigots arranged in rows, each firing a 65-pound bomb through black powder propellant. The bombs carried contact fuses that armed after impact, requiring solid collision with steel to detonate. The launcher could not traverse or elevate independently. The ship had to maneuver to aim the weapon. Reloading took 3 minutes and required manual handling of heavy projectiles in weather that could range from calm to storm force. Yet despite its limitations, the Hedgehog worked. It solved the blind spot problem. It maintained sonar contact. It delivered contact detonation. American adoption came through reverse lend-lease, British technology flowing west as payment for the destroyers, aircraft and supplies. America sent east. Captain Hammond worked with British engineers to adapt the weapon for American destroyer escorts. The modifications were minor, mostly concerning mounting brackets and electrical firing circuits. The core technology transferred intact. By late 1942, Hedgehogs were entering American service. By mid-1943, they were standard equipment on new destroyer escort construction. By 1944, they were sinking submarines in numbers that validated every dollar spent, every hour invested in training, every engineer's calculation. The weapon's descendants served into the Cold War and beyond. The British Squid, introduced in late 1943, fired 3 large depth charges in a triangular pattern to depths exceeding 600 feet. The Limbo, developed post-war, added gyroscopic stabilization and increased range to over 1,000 yards. The Mousetrap, American development for small patrol craft, used rocket propulsion to achieve similar effects with minimal launcher weight. Soviet navies copied the Hedgehog as the MBU 200 Sol 1949, then developed the MBU 600 with extended range. The principle, forward-throwing contact-fused anti-submarine projectiles, proved sufficiently sound that variations served on warships for decades. Modern anti-submarine warfare has moved beyond mortars to homing torpedoes and rocket-launched weapons. The Hedgehog and its descendants belong to museums now, preserved examples standing in Navy yards and maritime museums. One sits in the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington. Another resides at the USS Silverside Submarine Museum in Muskegon, Michigan. Visitors can see the spigot arrangement, touch the bombs with their flat noses and tubular tails, read the plaques explaining how this ungainly device changed naval warfare. Most visitors move on quickly. The Hedgehog does not photograph as dramatically as battleship guns or carrier aircraft. It lacks the aesthetic appeal of torpedo tubes or radar arrays. But for those who understand its significance, the Hedgehog represents something profound. It demonstrates how incremental technical advantages compound into strategic effects. The weapon itself was not revolutionary. Contact fuses existed. Forward-throwing launchers existed. Spigot mortars existed. The genius lay in combining existing technologies to solve a specific problem, then integrating the weapon into a larger system of intelligence, sensors, and doctrine. That integration, that systematic approach to warfare, characterized American and British success in World War II. The Japanese, for all their courage and technical sophistication in certain areas, never developed equivalent integration. Their anti-submarine warfare remained fractured. Convoy escorts operated independently with minimal coordination. Air patrols and surface ships rarely shared information. Sonar and radar, where they existed, fed data to individual ships rather than centralized plotting centers. The Japanese established an anti-submarine warfare school only in March 1944, nearly 2.5 years into the Pacific War. By that time, American submarines had devastated Japanese merchant shipping. The lessons came too late to matter. England's patrol illuminated that disparity. American codebreakers read Japanese submarine positions and radioed them to ships. Those ships carried radar that detected surfaced submarines at night. They mounted sonar that tracked submerged contacts through evasive maneuvers. They operated from forward bases that kept them supplied and maintained thousands of miles from home. They employed weapons that detonated on contact, eliminating guesswork, and they trained crews to execute doctrine under pressure, turning individual skills into team performance. The Japanese submarines, capable and well-designed by 1944 standards, could not overcome those systemic advantages. USS captain executed reasonable tactics. He dove when detected, changed depth to evade, turned to throw off attack geometry. All standard procedures that would have worked against 1942-era American anti-submarine capabilities. But by May 1944, the capability had evolved. Continuous sonar contact plus forward-throwing contact weapons equaled kills. Roein 100x through Roein 108 repeated the pattern. Each captain fought well. Each crew did what training taught them. Each boat died because the American system had matured past the point where individual skill could compensate. Only Roein 105 came close to escaping, and that owed more to endurance than to any technical advantage. Lieutenant Inu and his crew fought for over 24 hours, exhausting the patience and ammunition of George and Raby, before England arrived with fresh Hedgehog loads. Had England not been available, Roein 105 might have survived to fight another day, but that hypothetical illustrates the American advantage. 3 destroyer escorts hunting 1 submarine, with a 4th available if needed, backed by codebreakers who provided targeting data and logistics that ensured ammunition resupply. The Japanese had no equivalent redundancy. Each submarine fought alone, received minimal support, and could expect no rescue if damaged. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The aftermath stretched beyond 1944. Admiral King's promise that the Navy would always carry a ship named England was fulfilled with the guided missile cruiser commissioned in 1963. That England, CG-22, served through Vietnam, through the Cold War, through Desert Storm. She screened carriers, conducted missile strikes, performed search and rescue. When she decommissioned in 1994, the promise seemed to expire. No new England appeared on the Navy's building lists, but the name endures in memory, in the history books, in the lesson plans at anti-submarine warfare schools. The Hedgehog itself transitioned from cutting-edge weapon to museum piece within 2 decades. By the 1960s, homing torpedoes offered better range and accuracy. By the 1970s, rocket-launched weapons like ASROC provided standoff capability that mortars could not match. The Hedgehog's limitations, short range, fixed firing pattern, manual reloading, became unacceptable as submarine performance improved. Soviet submarines could dive deeper, move faster, operate more quietly than World War II boats. The Hedgehog, designed to kill submarines at 200 yards and 200 feet depth, could not reach modern submarines operating at 1,000 feet or attacking from 10 miles away. Yet the principles endured: continuous contact, forward projection, contact detonation. Modern anti-submarine weapons still embody those concepts, though the execution has evolved. A ship-launched torpedo swims out ahead of the launching platform, maintains sonar contact through its own active or passive sonar, and detonates on contact or in close proximity. The geometry differs, the technology differs, but the underlying logic traces back to the Hedgehog and the lessons learned in 1944, on that lattice of ocean where code met calculus, where a mortar's tight flower of bombs bloomed and fell, the balance tipped and never tipped back. The Japanese submarine force entered terminal decline from which it never recovered. American hunter-killer groups multiplied, spreading across the Pacific, tightening the net. By 1945, Japanese submarines could barely operate. Those that sortied rarely returned. The sea had become an American domain, contested only at the margins, controlled through a combination of technology, training, and industrial power that Japan could not match. England's crew understood this at some level. They had seen the pattern. 6 submarines in 12 days. 5 direct kills, 1 assist. Over 400 enemy dead. 0 friendly casualties. Those numbers told a story about advantage, about what happened when superior systems met inferior opposition. The sailors might not have articulated it in those terms. They saw themselves as doing their jobs, following orders, executing the mission. But the numbers spoke regardless. This was not a fair fight. This was industrial warfare, where production capacity and technical sophistication determined outcomes as surely as courage and skill. The moral dimension remains uncomfortable. 400 Japanese submariners died in crushing darkness, their deaths necessary to American strategy, but no less final for being strategically justified. They served their country, followed their orders, fought with the tools and training they possessed. Their deaths were not wasted in the sense that they died in action rather than in surrender, but they were futile in that no amount of individual courage could overcome the systemic advantages arrayed against them. The Hedgehog, backed by code-breaking, radar, sonar, logistics, and doctrine, represented a level of warfare integration that Japan could not match in 1944. England's patrol demonstrated that the Pacific War's outcome was no longer in doubt by mid-1944. The industrial and technical balance had shifted so decisively that Japanese forces could not sustain effective resistance. They could fight, delay, inflict casualties. They could not win. The 12 days in May, when a small destroyer escort systematically destroyed an entire submarine squadron, crystallized that reality. The weapon, the Hedgehog, was simply the instrument through which larger forces operated. Industrial production, scientific research, systematic training, operational integration, these factors, not individual weapons or units, determined the war's trajectory. The wrecks remain. 6 submarines rest on the Pacific floor, their hulls gradually corroding, their interiors long since dark and silent. Fish move through the compartments that once held men. Silt covers the control rooms where captains made their final decisions. The ocean has claimed them completely, as it claims all wrecks given enough time, but their story persists in the archives, in the after-action reports, in the memoirs written by England's crew, in the historical analyses that examine what happened and why. 79 years later, the lessons remain relevant. Technology matters, but integration matters more. Individual weapons matter, but systems matter more. Courage matters, but preparation matters more. England's crew proved that mastery comes from combining many small advantages into overwhelming superiority. The Hedgehog was part of it, but only part. Remove the Codebreakers, and the submarines would not have been found. Remove the radar, and nighttime detection would have failed. Remove the sonar, and continuous tracking would have been impossible. Remove the doctrine, and the weapons would have been wasted. Remove the industrial base, and the ships would not have existed. All of it together, fused into a coherent system, delivered 6 submarines killed in 12 days. That fusion of intelligence, technology, training, and will represents the true lesson. Not that one weapon or one ship or one crew made the difference, but that all elements working together created capabilities far exceeding the sum of individual parts. That lesson applies, beyond naval warfare, beyond World War II, beyond any specific conflict. It speaks to how complex organizations achieve difficult objectives. Through systematic integration of available resources, through preparation that turns theory into reflex, through discipline that sustains performance under pressure. England's 12 days stand as testament to those principles. A small ship with a modest crew, armed with a weapon developed by another navy, executing doctrine refined through hard experience, destroyed an enemy submarine squadron and contributed to one of the Pacific War's decisive battles. Not through miracle or luck, but through method married to will. The sea keeps the wrecks, history keeps the story. And somewhere in the lesson plans at anti-submarine warfare schools, instructors still reference England's patrol as an example of how to do it right. Find the enemy, track the enemy, kill the enemy, confirm the kill, then move to the next contact and do it again. 12 days, 6 submarines, 1 destroyer escort, and a weapon that changed everything. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.